I joined as a hardware engineer, discovered that you could not fix, understand, or even appreciate the customer's problems unless you were at least had an inkling of the software and how it ran, particularly in those days. So yes, it was learning by rote to a degree, but it's given me a soft approach to hardware problems and a hard approach to software problems, so they overlap. Let's be totally honest. You bought a machine from a manufacturer. It didn't matter who it was. It came with sufficient software to get you started. But the next thing you turned to were the only tools that you were given, which was the programming manual, blank sheet of paper, a pile of pencils, and if you were really lucky, an eraser to take the mistakes away. So yes, it was by hard learning. People had to think very, very deeply about what they were trying to do. It was actually installed in London University when I first saw it. One of the things that has been a lovely return to my own history is my own fingerprints are certainly under the covers of that machine when it was still at London University. Um, it was basically just a data handler to do very, very mundane tasks. But the one thing that it did do, which made it stand out in history, was it actually processed the results of GCE exams. It actually calculated a potential pass mark, which was then vetted by a human. But above all, it printed the actual certificates. And being a very, very early machine, there was a lot of tender loving care put into a very, very basic kind of printer to get something which people could be proud of. So they could look at their certificate, and instead of seeing a lot of smudges, it was actually readable. And I find it fascinating when I talk to people and they say, "Oh, I've got one of those." And they get it out and it is still readable after all of this time. First of all, historically, it was a purely manual thing. Then it became a little more central because you had to centralize the scores to get the averages, to get the pass marks, to work out where people sat. In other words, their A's, B's, C's had bar marks. Those bar marks were not set in concrete. They were a percentage of the average, and they still are. So it meant it became more and more centralised. And as it became more and more centralised, it became a longer and a longer job. But there was a time scale by which those results should have been produced. And it was getting beyond the capabilities of desktop people using hand calculation to do those figures. And it was number crunching by hand and then assisted with comptometers that was replaced by a computerized system. When we moved to magnetic tape, sites like, I'm trying to remember their full title, Department of Education and Science, they actually had a 25 or a 27 reel file of teachers' qualifications. They would sort people to jobs using the machine. The actual tape sort would take days because the operators had to keep changing the reels. It sounds ludicrous in this day and age where you and I are walking around with tens of gigabytes or hundreds of gigabytes of memory on our phones in our pocket. But a one reel of heavy duty wired magnetic tape would take about 10 megabyte. It's ludicrous, but 27 of those reels and you're up to a quarter of a gig in those days. It's a lot of data. Government bodies would tend to buy British. There are security implications, there are supply implications, there are alliance implications. So it becomes beyond the normal, oh, I'll go and buy a red computer. It's whose red computer and will it work tomorrow if I fall out with Fred? That kind of silly situation. Um, So it would be the government bodies who installed them first. That experience would then move off into the commercial field, and it would spread in that way. But again, I'll just stress it, it was really the numbers of machines. It was very strange for machines to be produced in any quantity over 20, let alone 100. And I think the original design specs, when they went for it, was they had to make and sell at least 50 machines to break even. They realised they were on a winner when they passed the 75 mark, they passed the 100, and by then the hardware was showing its age, but the concepts were ready to be moved on because they had been developed. Um, so sticking with British meant that you had a compatible range. Going to IBM would give you off-the-shelf solutions, but remember, you never kept the machine. It was never yours. Therefore, the data was never yours.